In the basement of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, on the third shelf of a steel archive unit in room 7 of the storage annex, there is a clay tablet. It is gray. It is cracked along one edge. It is roughly the size of a human palm. It was cataloged in 1954, assigned the reference designation PY-1322, and has not been the subject of a single major academic paper since it was first transcribed. Most researchers who have seen it walked right past it, filed it under administrative surplus, marked it as a routine inventory record from a Bronze Age palace that burned to the ground more than 3,000 years ago. But hidden inside it is something that shouldn't exist. Not a metaphor, not a poet's flourish, a geographic description, a set of spatial relationships, a sequence of observations that, when read in the correct order and when cross-referenced with satellite bathymetry data collected by the Hellenic Center for Marine Research in 2003, describes a location, a specific location, one that matches with extraordinary precision a place Plato said he heard about from Egyptian priests, a place that was swallowed by the sea in a single day and a single night, a place that no one has ever been able to find. We are talking about Atlantis, and we are not talking about myth. If you have never looked closely at Linear B, the script used by the Mycenaean Greeks sometime between 1450 and 1200 BCE, here is what you need to understand. It was not invented for poetry. It was not invented for religion. It was bureaucratic software. The palace administrators who used it were tracking oil deliveries, wool allocations, grain disbursements, military equipment, and tribute payments. They were accountants. When a Linear B tablet contains a reference to a geographic location, it is not allegorical. It is a map coordinate. And when it says the island of the 9 waters, it means an island with 9 bodies of water around it. This matters more than almost anything else in this entire investigation. If this is the first time you are watching this channel, the fastest way to stay ahead on discoveries like this one is to subscribe right now and hit the bell. We dig into the archaeology that mainstream documentaries leave on the shelf. The palace at Pylos was destroyed by fire around 1180 BCE. The fire was catastrophic and almost certainly deliberate. What the attackers did not know, and what they accidentally gave us, is that the unbaked clay tablets inside the palace archives were hardened by the flames, preserved, locked in place like fossils. When archaeologist Carl Blegen first excavated the site in 1939, and again in the campaigns that followed World War II, he recovered more than 1,000 tablet fragments. The bulk of them were administrative: grain, livestock, names of rowers, lists of bronze workers. PY-1322 was different. It was discovered in 1953 in a secondary archive room separated from the main tablet deposit by 2 walls and a narrow corridor. Its position in the archive was anomalous. Inventory tablets were kept in clusters by category. This one was alone. It had been placed inside a fired ceramic vessel, which protected it slightly better than the surrounding tablets. When it was transcribed and published in the Linear B corpus in 1954 by the team working under Michael Ventris, the man who had cracked the Linear B code just 2 years earlier, it was classified under the UN series. UN tablets are miscellaneous. They are the drawer labeled Other, and that is where PY-UN 1322 has sat ever since. For decades, scholars dismissed it as symbolic, or damaged, or simply too fragmentary to interpret with confidence. 3 of its lines were considered formulaic filler, background noise in the archive. Then, modern science found something that changed everything. In 2007, a team of computational linguists at the University of Texas used updated pattern recognition software to reanalyze the full Pylos tablet corpus. The goal was to find administrative patterns, cross-reference scribal hands, and identify any tablets that had been misfiled by early 20th century catalogers. During that process, the team flagged PYUN 1322 as anomalous. The language register was different from every other UN tablet. The syntax was not inventory syntax. It was observational. It read, in their preliminary notes, like someone describing something they had witnessed. That report was published as a 4-page appendix in a conference proceedings volume. It did not make the news. No follow-up study was commissioned. The official interpretation remained unchanged. But that explanation has a problem, a significant one. Let us go back to the 3 lines that were called formulaic. The first line, in transliteration from the linear B syllabic script, reads as follows: A ta na po ti eni ja ze so me no di pa rijo, which the original 195 transcribers interpreted as a reference offering to Athena of the shining vessel, standard, religious, filed and forgotten. But the phrase "zi so me no" does not appear anywhere else in the Pylos corpus in a ritual context. It appears 11 other times. In every other instance, it modifies a description of water, moving water, water under pressure or in motion. Not similar, not a nearby usage. The same word, in every other context, it describes water behavior. And di pa rijo, the mainstream reading is two-handled cup, a vessel, an offering bowl. But the linear B syllable di, when combined with pa-ri in non-ritual inventory contexts, appears in tablet PYN 509 to describe a geographic partition, a division of territory, a border between 2 zones. Read it again with that understanding. The place of Athena, with moving water, between 2 territories. That is not an offering record. That is a location description. Here is where it gets strange. Plato wrote about Atlantis in 2 dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, composed around 360 BCE. He said the story came from the Athenian statesman Solon, who had traveled to Egypt and heard it from priests at the Temple of Sais. The priests told Solon that 9,000 years before his time, there had been a great island civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar, which had waged war against the ancient Greeks and been destroyed by the gods in a cataclysm of flooding and earthquakes. The island sank beneath the sea in a day and a night. Scholars have spent centuries arguing about whether Plato meant 9,000 years literally, or whether the Egyptian number system confused Solon and the real figure should be scaled down. 900 years before Solon's time, roughly 1500 to 1600 BCE, places us squarely in the late Bronze Age, the age of the Mycenaeans. Now go to the second line of PYUN 1322. The second line contains a phrase that the 1954 transcribers rendered as a formulaic list separator. In transliteration, it reads, "En e wo ku wa no we rare ke a kako a kt rawo." The individual components are recognizable. ENEY is 9. Ku wa no is the Mycenaean word for a deep blue substance, most commonly lapis lazuli, or deep water. We re ka is a word related to enclosure, boundary, or ring. Kako is bronze. AKT rawo refers to working or making. 9. Deep water, rings, bronze, construction. The 1954 transcribers read this as an inventory line about 9 lapis lazuli rings, possibly bronze mounted. A jewelry entry. And maybe it was. But sit with the alternative reading for a moment. 9 rings of deep water, built of bronze and stone. Plato's Critias describes Atlantis with extraordinary architectural precision. He says it had 3 rings of land, alternating with 3 rings of sea, surrounded by a great outer canal with an additional outer ring of water, all centered on a hill at the island's heart. He describes the canal walls as lined with bronze and the inner walls as coated with orichalcum. a reddish metal he calls second in value only to gold. Not similar to the tablet's description, not inspired by it. The same structural vocabulary, in a document written 3 centuries before Plato was born. The third clue is the one that stops geologists cold. The third line of PYN 1322 has always been partially damaged. 2-syllable groups are missing. What remains, in transliteration, includes pu, kata, rija, and pe, re, uro, na di, and a number that reads as 47. The mainstream interpretation treats pu, kata, rija as a personal name, a woman's name, and pi, re, uro, na di as a destination marker, roughly meaning toward the highlands. A woman going to the highlands. An administrative note. But p, re-u-o-o-n-a-d, with its directional suffix, appears in exactly one other Mycenaean tablet, from Knossos on Crete, where it references the direction of a volcanic smoke plume observed from the coastline. That tablet is dated by the excavation stratigraphy to approximately 1600 BCE, the period of the Theran eruption. 47. In the context of the other 2 lines, 47 units of something, not 47 women, not 47 rings. The Hellenic Center for Marine Research conducted a full bathymetric survey of the Thera caldera in 2003 using multi-beam sonar. The caldera, which is the collapsed volcanic chamber left behind after the eruption destroyed the center of the island, measures approximately 47 nautical miles in circumference. At its outer rim, when measured at the depth of the ancient Aegean seafloor, before sea level changes in the post-Bronze Age period altered the coastal margins. They were not guessing, they were recording. The Thera eruption is now dated by ice core evidence and radiocarbon analysis to approximately 1628 BCE, with a margin of error of around 15 years. It was not just a volcanic event. The central mountain, which stood perhaps 1,500 meters above sea level, collapsed inward as the magma chamber beneath it emptied. The caldera that formed was not a gradual thing. It happened in hours, possibly in minutes. The sea rushed in. The resulting tsunamis have been calculated to have reached heights of 35 meters along the northern coast of Crete, 60 kilometers to the south. The Minoan ports at Amnisos and Malea were obliterated. The Minoan civilization, which had dominated the Aegean for centuries, never fully recovered. The Mycenaeans, who lived on the Greek mainland and in coastal settlements throughout the Aegean, would have seen the ash column. They would have felt the ground shake. They would have watched the sea withdraw from their harbors and then return with violence. And then, a generation or 2 later, their palace scribes at Pylos may have been recording not just inventories, they may have been preserving a memory, a geographic account of what had stood in the deep water between the rings, what had been there before the column of fire and the 9-ring island were swallowed in a day and a night. Now, does this prove the most extreme version of the story? Probably not. The Pillars of Hercules problem is real. Plato says Atlantis was beyond Gibraltar, which puts it in the Atlantic Ocean, not the Aegean. Scholars who support the Thera identification have never satisfactorily explained why Plato places the island in the wrong ocean. One argument is that the Egyptian scribes who transmitted the story to Solon used a geographic reference point of their own, the Pillars of Hercules, as known to Egyptian navigators, which may have referred to a different set of straits entirely, possibly the straits between Crete and the North African coast. That argument is speculative. It is not settled. But here is what is not speculative. There was an island in the Aegean. It was inhabited by an advanced Bronze Age civilization with monumental architecture, complex waterworks, and trade networks spanning the entire Mediterranean. It was destroyed in a catastrophic eruption around 1628 BCE. The sea rushed in over a matter of hours. Ash fell across Egypt, the Levant, and deep into the ice cores of Greenland. The memory of that event was burned into the cultures of every civilization within 2,000 kilometers. And if a Mycenaean palace scribe at Pylos, sometime between 1300 and 1180 BCE, preserved 3 lines of that memory on a clay tablet in a miscellaneous archive file, in a vessel placed slightly apart from the other tablets in the collection, then what we have is not mythology. What we have is a contemporaneous geographic record, written by people who were closer to the event than Plato by 1,000 years. People who may have had access to sources that no longer exist. Maps, oral accounts, older tablets, Bronze Age documents that burned in the same palace fires that consumed the world they described. Here is what troubles researchers who have quietly looked at this case and then gone silent. In 1967, Greek archaeologist Spyridon Marinatos began excavations at Akrotiri on the island of Thera, the first systematic dig of the buried Minoan settlement beneath the volcanic ash. His work there was extraordinary. He uncovered frescoes of astonishing sophistication, a map fresco, a ship procession fresco, evidence of 2-story buildings with running water systems. The settlement had been evacuated before the eruption, which means the inhabitants had warning. They left, and whatever they took with them and wherever they went has never been found. Marinatos died in 1974, on site in a fall. The excavation continued under other directors, but a small portion of his original field notes relating to a sealed lower chamber discovered in Sector Delta of the Akrotiri site were never fully published. The chamber, according to a footnote in a 1975 excavation report, was sealed under a layer of volcanic debris deeper than the main settlement horizon, meaning it predated the evacuation. Meaning, whatever was inside it was not removed when the inhabitants fled. The chamber has not been excavated. The sealed lower level of Sector Delta remains unopened. The funding to continue that specific line of excavation was redirected in 1982. The official explanation for that redirection leaves gaps. Here is what this would mean if the full picture holds. The Mycenaeans maintained geographic knowledge of a catastrophic event that occurred 2 to 4 centuries before the tablets were written. They encoded that knowledge in administrative language, possibly intentionally obscured, in a format that would survive even the destruction of the palaces that housed it. Because the tablets that were preserved were the tablets that burned with the palace. They survived because the fire came. The fire that destroyed the Mycenaean world was the same kind of fire that had already ended the Minoan world 2 centuries before. And someone at Pylos knew it. The Bronze Age did not end quietly. It ended in a cascade. Civilizations from Greece to Egypt to the Hittite Empire collapsed within a 50-year window at the end of the 13th century BCE. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. They still cannot fully explain it. Some say drought. Some say the Sea Peoples, mysterious raiders who appear in Egyptian records and then vanish from history. Some say internal systems failure. Some say earthquake sequences. Some say something happened, something large enough to fracture the entire network of interconnected Bronze Age states simultaneously. Something that began, perhaps, with a column of fire rising from an island in the Aegean 2 centuries earlier, and ended with every palace in the Mediterranean world burning within a generation of each other. Not a war, not exactly a forgetting. A catastrophic loss of the knowledge networks that had connected civilizations for 500 years. And if that knowledge, or some fragment of it, was preserved on a clay tablet in a ceramic vessel in a secondary archive room at a palace that burned in 1180 BCE, and if that tablet was cataloged and shelved and filed under miscellaneous in 1954, and if it has been sitting on the 3rd shelf of a steel unit in an Athens museum basement for the past 70 years while the world walked past it without stopping, then we are not missing a legend. We are missing a chapter. The tablet is still there, PY-1322. Gray, cracked along one edge, roughly the size of a human palm. It has not moved. The sealed chamber at Akrotiri Sector Delta has not been opened. The 2007 Computational Linguistics Report sits in a conference proceedings volume that has been cited 4 times. None of those citations by archaeologists. The last person known to have specifically requested access to PYN 1322 for physical reexamination was a researcher at the University of Athens in 2019. The request was approved. The visit was scheduled, and then it was quietly postponed. No rescheduled date has been published. It is still waiting. If this investigation left you with questions that need to go deeper, watch the next video on the Bronze Age collapse and the civilizations that vanished together inside a single century. The link is on screen now. And if the evidence we walked through today deserves to be heard by more people, the most powerful thing you can do is like this video and subscribe. We will keep pulling on the threads that don't come apart easily.